You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Hi, I'm Dr. Pamela Kreiser, and welcome back to NCR 507, which is our course in Research Design and Interpretation. The class today we're going to talk about really centers around this notion of program evaluation. Now, when we think about evaluating a program, we think about basically seeing, is it effective in what it intends to do? In other words, given the purpose of that program, which is usually to solve a problem or to fill a need, is the evaluation of effectiveness showing us what's working and not working in that program? So when we think about it, we want to just address it in that simple way. Now, the reality is that out there are a lot of jobs in this area. A lot of program evaluators are needed in our world to justify the many programs that we see throughout the United States. So if you're thinking about that as an area of employment, do consider that there are trainings available in this area where you can learn to systematically analyze the effectiveness of a program. Now, when we think about this notion related to our class, today we want to tie the idea of program evaluation to the quantitative analysis. And what do I mean by that? It's really all about numbers. When we talk about evaluating programs, we can say they're good, we can say they're working, but the reality is that individuals want to see how they're working. They want to see the numbers. How many people are we serving? In what way? And learn more than just the descriptors of what's going on in that organization, but see what kind of possible outcomes might be a result of the change that that program is making or isn't making. So when we think about program evaluation, we want to tie it very closely today to this idea of quantitative measurement. Now, the first clip that I've selected to show you is one that you may have seen before. I posted it earlier in the semester to identify program evaluation. And today we want to look at it through the lens of how do quantitative methods fit in to program evaluation. Let's take a look.
This is a brief introduction to the field of program evaluation. Program evaluation is the use of social research procedures to systematically investigate the effectiveness of programs. And the field of program evaluation and the field of research are very closely linked. The key difference between the two is that in the field of program evaluation, we are making value judgments about a program, whereas in research, the findings are presented, for example, statistically significant findings, but there's not a value judgment attached to those. Rossi identified 5 program domains. And this is 5 areas where evaluation work is done. The first is in the area of needs assessments. So looking at whether there is a need for a program or service. The second is evaluating the design of a program or service. The third is looking at the implementation of a program or service or a process evaluation. The fourth is looking at an outcome evaluation of a program or service. This is often called a summative evaluation. And closely linked to that, but further down the line, is an impact evaluation. And we'll talk about the difference between an outcome and impact evaluation in a moment. And the fifth area is evaluating the efficiency of a program or service. I'm just going to briefly talk about 2 of the most common ones that you'll find in the area of program evaluation. The first is a process evaluation, or sometimes called a formative evaluation, and sometimes called an implementation evaluation. And this is really looking at the program as it's being rolled out and asking questions about how it's being rolled out and whether the way it's being rolled out will likely lead to meeting the outcomes as set by the program. So, for example, if we have a program in which there's 15 sessions and they are based on a curriculum, are all the sessions being delivered? Are they being delivered as they were written? Are they being delivered in the time sequence that was recommended? Are there factors outside of the actual written curriculum that can impact the delivery of the program? Were the people delivering the program trained well enough? So it asks all kinds of questions related to how a program is being rolled out, what is supporting the rollout of a program, and what is hindering the rollout of a program. The next type of evaluation is an outcome evaluation, often called a summative evaluation. And this is looking at a program and whether the program met the outcomes that it was intended to meet. So if we had a 15-session program designed to increase social skills, we want to know, did that program actually lead to an increase in social skills among the participants? And we would look at the specific outcomes and evaluate each of those outcomes. So I just want to briefly talk about impact evaluations as the last point in this brief presentation. So often we hear impact evaluation and outcome evaluation used interchangeably. And while an impact evaluation is looking at outcomes, it looks at more than that. So an impact evaluation really is an evaluation that is looking at long-term and deeper outcomes. It also is looking at trying to figure out to what degree can outcomes be attributed to the program that we're examining, and to what degree do we have to credit other things in the environment that may have led to program outcomes. So for example, if you have a program that's focusing on poverty reduction, and we find out that actually while our program is running, there was also some changes in policy in our favor to help people reduce poverty. And there was also other programs in the community that were supporting people. We have to try to tease out as best we can what slice of the pie can we take credit for, and where is credit due in other areas. The same can be said for outcomes that aren't so favorable. We want to look at what influenced outcomes that weren't very favorable, whether it was policies or other situations happening in the community. So that's just a brief overview of evaluation. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to go to the website.
So when we think about this notion of program evaluation, really the key thing we want to think about is this idea of providing not just detective services where we go and find out what's going on in that program, but we're also supplying a value judgment. In other words, we make a decision to say this is effective or it's not effective, and we make recommendations based on what we find out in our detective work. And then ultimately, you heard the last part of that presentation talking about this idea of isolating other influences. Now let's talk about numbers once again. When you think about numbers in this process, when you look at that video with the lens of numbers, we're going to try to figure out what's going on, and our detective work is going to be largely quantitative. Let's measure everything we can so that we can get some comparables. And then when we think about providing a value judgment, it's one thing to say something doesn't work. It's another thing to show that it doesn't work using the numbers. So as you think about using numbers as a program evaluator, they supply some of the credibility that you and I need when we're making these value judgments. Additionally, the last notion of isolating other effects is something we can do numerically as well. We can actually hold variables constant, we can measure other impact of variables, and we can see how the variables are related. And we'll see that in future classes, how we do that from a quantitative standpoint. Now, when we get into program evaluation, of course, one of our hottest topics or most important topics is the area of stakeholders. When we talk about stakeholders, we're talking about the people who care about our program. So these are the people that care about what happens. And that's our first measure of a stakeholder, is someone who cares about the outcomes of the program. We also want to know who's invested in it. Sometimes in programs that we're evaluating, there are people who are founders, people who are financial contributors to it. People spend time, money, attention, all these things on programs. So that's a second area of stakeholders that we would identify. Another area is who are the decision makers. So when you think about a program, and we think about the idea of people who make the decisions around that program, of course, they're going to be stakeholders as well. And then the last dimension of talking about stakeholders is this idea of what kind of people care about the results of this program evaluation. And I think that's a very interesting thing to acknowledge as a program evaluator, this idea that when I give my results, who will care about those results and for what purpose will they use those results? Will it be to refund the project? Will it be to get rid of the project? Will it be to make some changes, some modifications? And so as we think about those ideas, we can identify stakeholders pretty easily in terms of our first list. Now, one of the other areas I hear about is this idea that there are hidden stakeholders. In other words, there are people who would also be added to our list of those we would consider stakeholders. This next clip goes into that idea. Let's take a look.
First, I would like to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy days. I am honored to be able to present to you today. So thanks for your participation. Also, as everybody's lines are muted, if you have any questions, please be sure to submit those online through the chat box that you'll see on your screen as we go along. There will be an opportunity at the end to answer questions, but if we were in a room together, I would want to have as interactive a session as possible. So certainly if you do have questions along the way, it would be welcome to address those. Before we got to this presentation here, I did want to mention that the majority of this presentation is based largely on Chapter 3 of my book, Stakeholder Engagement, The Game Changer for Program Management. If you haven't read it and you're interested after today, you can find it on CRC Press, and I've provided the link here, and you can also find it on Amazon. Before we get into the big piece of the session here, I do want to start with a story. It's been quite a while now, maybe 8 years ago. I was a new employee at the company. I'm not going to get into names or specifics here, but I was a new employee at a fairly large company, and I was a full-time employee and brand new. But previously, I'd been a consultant elsewhere. So in my first week, I was asked to meet with key leadership members to get input on where they felt pain points in relation to organizational structure and strategy, and this was specifically for the IT department. About my business, meeting with managers, had really great conversations. And at the end of that week, I met with a very senior leader, and after we talked for a bit, he asked my opinion about a specific item and where in the organization that item should be handled. That specific item was something I consider to be pretty minor. It was not even related to technology in any way, shape, or form. It actually had to do with handling a newsletter, a particular newsletter having to do with the business side of the organization. So I gave him my opinion. He immediately turned red in the face and got visibly agitated. There was steam coming out of this guy's ears. Then came this big lecture about assumptions and about how I couldn't just march in there, and I don't understand the environment, I don't know the history, and I don't know what promises have been made. Statement, you don't know what promises have been made, really stuck with me and shaped a lot of how I handle stakeholder management now. It was a big lesson learned. Well, that little item to me was little to me. It was not little to the stakeholder. You know, I tell the story as an example of why it's important to understand everybody's perspective and also the network of relationships in an organization. It turned out that this guy had an arrangement with somebody who he'd worked with for 20 years that promised him that he would always make sure this newsletter was taken care of. Well, this other individual is now in IT, still writing the newsletter that had nothing to do with IT. And so, of course, I was suggesting that it be handled elsewhere. Not that it would be dropped, but I didn't get that part of the conversation. But if you don't understand the network of relationships in an organization, even the smallest little thing can completely derail you. And so that is where I started really thinking more about how I handle stakeholders and stakeholder engagement. So the focus of today's session is really on just that, learning how to uncover that web of informal relationships that will control the progress and outcomes of your program, and how to include those individuals in your stakeholder engagement plan to drive program success. So as far as the session overview, A few things we're going to cover today. One is I'm going to introduce the concept of organizational network analysis to you, more on that in a minute. We're going to work to understand the difference between traditional organization charts that you may be used to seeing and social network maps. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the art of what I call the coffee talk, using your informal networking skills to build your network, and also some tips on virtual relationship building. We're going to take all of those pieces and discuss that and how to synthesize the information gathered in your formal and informal networking efforts, and to build those into a power map. Okay, organizational network analysis. Organizational network analysis is a formal means of understanding the relationships and information flow in an organization. It provides a view into the true information flow of an organization and provides a visual depiction of the organization in a relational view. So it shows not just the links between people and groups, but also the strength of those links and how information flows between those links. It actually is it's very formalized in that it uses mathematical algorithms to map those relationships and the information flow. You may be used to seeing. So this, what you're looking at here, is just a traditional organization chart. And I apologize, the names are pretty small here, but you've got Stella up there at the top as the SVP. So you would think that Stella would have the most influence in this organization, with her direct reports David Sanders, Cooper Townsend, and Brenda McLemore, and Wendy Connors over there kind of being the next level of leadership. And then there's a number of names and boxes below there. This is what a lot of us are used to seeing in our organizations. And when you come into and you're looking at a new program, you might immediately think, okay, I need to establish relationships with Stella, David, Cooper, Brenda, and Wendy. And that's really where my focus may need to be. That is not necessarily going to get you to the guts of how information is really flowing in an organization. Certainly, it's still important to always include your program sponsors. If Stella's your program sponsor, you better believe she's going to be on your list of important stakeholders to talk to, but you need to make sure that you understand the relationships elsewhere in the organization, not just the top. We're getting more time on this slide here. So this is a very simplified organizational network map. So if you do an organizational network analysis, at the end, you end up with a map. And this, like I said, this is very simplified. This just has a small number of people. If you had an organization of, say, 400 people that you did an analysis on, it would be much larger, and you could maybe see more relationships. But the ones to do are to identify the hubs where most activity is concentrated. So if you look on here, you can see Zumba there has quite a few lines coming in out of Zumba there, and Finn and Connors also. You'll notice that Townsend is kind of up there on his own. So he reports to Ambler, that was the top lady, and that's great. So they have communication going back and forth, but nobody's feeding any information to Townsend. So is he really feeding the right information to Ambler? So if you're a program manager and you're not talking to Townsend and Townsend's talking to Ambler, that could be a potential blow up. Then you've got, let's see here, you also want to identify potential bottlenecks or points of failure. So you've got Zumba, you've got so much information going into Zumba, is she going to become a bottleneck? Also a way to discover the outliers. They may have untapped knowledge. So for example, you have Martin and Peterson in the lower right-hand piece here, and they're connected to each other. They're not connected to anybody else. They may have really important information that's not getting shared. So that's another potential group. You may want to understand more about what data they have. And then another piece is discover where it may be beneficial to create a new connection where one does not currently exist. So now, from Steve, saying, how could you possibly obtain this information? And Steve, that's exactly what we're going to get to as we dig further into this. We're going to talk about how to do a formal organizational network analysis, high level, and we're also going to talk about the informal way of gathering this information. I have an opinion and a bias towards one over the other, and I'll get into that for sure. John is asking, what about Connor? Well, Connor's definitely, he's got 2 links, Stanley and to a new hire to be determined there. We're missing a box there. New hire to be determined. But he does have a couple of links. But he does have a connection to Zumba, but he does not have, if he's going up to Ambler. Connors goes to Zumba, Zumba goes to Salmon, Salmon goes to Ambler. So it's taken a while for any information for Connors to get to Ambler. May get bottlenecked with Zumba, for example. So types of things you're going to look for, you know, like it's connected upward. He's not connected at all, parallel or downward. And others are not well connected at all. This guy Finn, kind of in the middle here, if you had looked back at the other organizational chart, he's the actual program manager. He's not connected directly either to Ambler's direct report that is senior to either of Ambler's.
So now that we've looked at the idea of stakeholders and hidden stakeholders, the other large topic to talk about is the area of logic modeling. And this is the way we use a logic model, usually a drawing of some kind, to actually organize and systematize how we're collecting data. We use the model to look at the places that we need to fill in from a quantitative perspective. Let's take a look at this next clip that talks about the importance and how we use logic modeling.
Data is everywhere. No, really, you use it in your everyday life. You collect, analyze, and act upon data when you do anything, from handling your household budget, counting calories in your diet, or figuring out the ideal time to leave for work. So, if data is everywhere, and you interact with it daily, why is this culture a recurrent theme in healthcare settings? And how can we turn that culture into this one? The simple fact is, you can't ignore data when trying to improve the quality of healthcare. Data is an essential part of our work. It shows us what needs to improve and whether or not specific actions are helping make these improvements. Don't know where to start? Why not start with the logic model? The logic model helps you determine what data you need, how you're going to collect it, and what the data is going to tell you. It's like a roadmap, an overview snapshot of what you're doing, and a great first step toward creating a new positive relationship with data. Let's work through an example. First, ask yourself, what are your short and long-term goals? Then, fill in the rest of the diagram with the information you already know: inputs, outputs, assumptions, and external factors. Inputs are what you invest, like staffing, funding, equipment, and technology. Outputs are the activities you're doing and whom you're doing them for. Assumptions are what you already know. And external factors are things that are out of your control, like organizational changes and environmental factors. Don't feel like you have enough information to start? The logic model helps you identify the data you need and tells you what's missing so you can figure out how to fill in the gaps. Feel like you have too much data and don't know what to do with it all? The logic model helps you organize and prioritize the data to avoid overcollection. Feel like you can't do it alone? No problem. To make the greatest impact, an organization should collaboratively develop and use logic models at all levels and staff positions for a shared sense of ownership and accountability. And the best part about logic models, they're flexible and evolving. You can create your logic model based on your current understanding and then revise it as you go along. Say your organization wants to improve staff retention. This is what your logic model might look like. Again, inputs are what we invest. Outputs are what we are doing. And outcomes are our goals. Assumptions are existing knowledge. And external factors are things that might matter but we can't control. In a struggling healthcare culture, data is everywhere, but nobody knows what to do with it. The team that takes the time to create a culture shift around embracing data, using the logic model as a guide, builds a stronger value proposition, which in the end is better for business and patients and residents. What kind of data culture do you want to create?
We can can see from the clip that when we're talking about logic modeling, it's a roadmap for how we're going to look at the overall program evaluation. Now, when you think about it, in that clip, they talked about some important notions worth talking about again. One is what's missing. When we start to fill in boxes, when we look at the big picture, the big roadmap, we can start to see areas where we need to actually fill in. And we might say to ourselves, oh, I need to collect data on this area. It's something that we haven't researched. It's something we don't know about. Alternatively, we might say, wow, we have too much data in this one area, and maybe we need to pare it down. Maybe we need to prioritize and decide what is the most important priority for our data collection and what it is we want to know. We use that overall logic model to guide us in terms of our overarching evaluation of the program. And ultimately, we use the logic model to really make all of our decisions regarding data organization and prioritization. Now, the last thing we want to talk about is this next clip, which involves the work of Kathy Lemon. And this last clip shows us kind of how we put all of these notions together. The idea of program evaluation, talking about stakeholders, using logic models, and then actually she even goes into the theory of change. How do we have change operating in our organizations? Let's take a look at this last clip.
Welcome to this session on logic models, theory of change, and program evaluation. The takeaway points for this session are to define the 6 basic parts of a logic model, understand the connections between research methods, program evaluation, and logic models, describe the 5 questions to answer when defining the situation a program is designed to solve, identify the 3 things logic models are used for, and define theory of change. This is a basic logic model. It includes 6 parts. The situation, which is a description of the problem that the program is designed to solve. Inputs, which are concrete resources that are invested in the program, such as funding, staff, or office space. Outputs, which include things like activities or services that are delivered by the program and the participation in these services by clients. Outcomes, which include short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. External factors, which are circumstances in the environment that influence the program, but over which the program has little control. And assumptions, which are conditions or resources that are needed for the success of the program. Once a program has a logic model, a program evaluation can be used to help us understand how the program is being implemented and the outcomes that are being achieved. The term program evaluation refers to a variety of research methods that are used to document and measure a program's outputs and outcomes. Logic models are used in 3 ways. In program design and planning, a logic model is used to guide the process of creating a new program. In this capacity, logic models help demonstrate how and why a program might work and can be used to illustrate this to potential funders or other key stakeholders. In the program design and planning stage, logic models are also linked to program evaluation plans that describe how the outputs and the outcomes will be documented and measured. In program implementation, logic models are used to guide the management and monitoring of outputs and outcomes. When used in this capacity, a program is already taking place, and a logic model is used to help manage and monitor how it is being implemented and the outcomes that are being achieved. During this stage, a logic model may be revised or adapted to respond to changing circumstances or to new information that is learned during program implementation. In program evaluation and strategic reporting, logic models are used to communicate program success to stakeholders. In this capacity, logic models illustrate the outcomes of a program to key stakeholders and serve as a tool to advocate for program expansion or continuation. Let's look at an example. The first step in creating a logic model is to define the situation that the program is designed to solve. 5 questions can help guide this process. What is the problem? What causes the problem? Who is affected by this problem? Who cares about whether or not this problem is solved? And what does existing research and experience tell us about how to solve this problem? When logic models are used in the program design and planning stages, a community needs assessment usually helps to guide the process of defining the situation. A needs assessment uses research methods and data to inform program planners about things like who the target population is, the extent of the problem, the location, key stakeholders, and existing research and experience. The situation that I'm defining for this example begins with the problem of parents being reported to the child welfare system for suspected child abuse or neglect. This problem may be caused because some parents do not have the knowledge, skills, and support they need in order to be effective parents. Demographic information on the people who are experiencing this problem indicates that 50% are Latino parents, 30% are Caucasian, 15% are Asian, and 5% are from other racial and ethnic groups. The average age of children in these families is 7 years, and 20% of families have Spanish as their primary language. Key stakeholders are defined as people or organizations that have an investment in solving the problem through the program's activities. In this example, the stakeholders include the public child welfare system, who receives the reports of child maltreatment. These professionals are responsible for referring families who are eligible for services to the parent training classes. Other key stakeholders are professionals in the community agencies who provide the parent training services to the parents, the funders who help provide the money necessary to deliver the program, and the families who participate in the services. Existing research and experience suggests that positive parenting programs, such as Triple P, can provide parents with knowledge and skills to be effective parents. In addition, the use of ongoing community resources helps parents to continue being effective parents after their participation in parent training has ended. Now that we have a definition of the situation, we want to ask the question, what would happen if this problem no longer existed? This is the long-term outcome of the program, or the ultimate impact the program wants to have on a macro level. If our problem is parents being reported to the child welfare system for child abuse, then if this problem no longer existed, parents would consistently parent safely, and children would be free from abuse or neglect. These are the long-term outcomes in this logic model. Next, we can identify the intermediate outcomes. These are the outcomes that need to happen in order for the long-term outcomes to occur. Intermediate outcomes reflect changes in behavior, skills, or abilities. For example, in this logic model, if long-term outcomes are achieved, then parents need to first be using positive parenting behaviors and accessing community resources for ongoing support. Next, we can identify the short-term outcomes. These are the outcomes that need to happen in order for the intermediate outcomes to occur. Short-term outcomes reflect changes in knowledge, feelings, attitudes, perceptions, and understanding. These changes are considered to happen before changes in behaviors, skills, or abilities. So in this logic model, if parents are using positive parenting behaviors and they're accessing community resources, then they must first have knowledge about positive parenting and also knowledge about how to access community resources. I just used a backward mapping process to define these three types of outcomes. I started with the situation I want to solve and then identified the long-term outcomes and worked backwards to define the other outcomes in the model. You can also use a forward mapping process to define the three types of outcomes. Either process is fine to use as long as the logical relationships between the categories are clear. To create clearly stated logical relationships between categories, you can use if-then statements. Using a forward mapping logic, the if-then statements for this logic model are: if parents increase their knowledge about positive parenting and about community resources, then parents will use positive parenting behaviors and access community resources for ongoing support. If parents are using positive parenting and community resources, then they will consistently parent safely and children will be free from abuse and neglect. The outputs in the logic model are the services being delivered and the participation of clients. In this example, the program will deliver an 8-week positive parenting class, and parents who have been reported to the child welfare system will attend these classes. So if the agency provides this service and parents involved in the child welfare system attend, then we can expect the short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes to occur. The inputs are the resources needed for the program to operate. In this example, the program needs funding, a positive parenting curriculum, training for staff, a convenient location for the parents, and a referral system for parents to enter the program. External factors are larger circumstances that are likely to affect the program, but over which the program has little control. These factors could be resources or barriers and can help promote or limit program success. For example, the demographic characteristics of the parents who are referred to the program represent an external factor. If the program has classes in English and Spanish, but parents who speak only Vietnamese begin to be referred, then the program will need to respond to this change. Other examples of external factors might be changes in the larger economy or social welfare policies that affect parents or the program. Assumptions are conditions or resources that are needed for the success of the program. For this program to be successful, it will need continued funding, an effective referral system, continued availability of staff, an effective positive parenting curriculum, and also a fundamental assumption of this program is that unsafe parenting is caused, at least in part, by a lack of knowledge, skills, and access to ongoing community resources. Hopefully, if I have defined the situation accurately, then there is some evidence to support the assumption that a positive parenting class and information about community resources will lead to effective parenting. That was step number 5 in defining the situation. A theory of change describes how and why a program is expected to achieve its stated outcomes. Throughout the process of creating this logic model, I've developed a series of if-then statements that describe the logical connections between the inputs, outputs, and outcomes. Taken together, these statements of logical connections between the concepts in the logic model are the theory of change. For example, if we assume, hopefully with some level of evidence, that unsafe parenting is caused by a lack of knowledge, skills, and resources, then when parents are reported to the child welfare system for child abuse, if we provide them with education and access to resources, then this will help solve the problem. At this point, it's good to bring up an important concept about logic models and the idea of causation. A logic model is assuming that there are causal connections between the parts of the model. That's the if-then statements in the theory of change. For example, we are assuming that when parents learn new information, that they will then translate that information into changes in their own behaviors. In the real world, we know that programs have a partial influence on outcomes. In social work, there is rarely one cause for any outcome because there are so many different circumstances that can occur in all of the systems that are influencing someone's life. However, even though logic models are a simplified version of what actually occurs in reality, it's important to remember that all programs have a theory of change, whether it's stated or not. In every human service program, we are making assumptions about why programs are supposed to make things better for our clients. Even though a logic model is not reality, it is a very useful tool because it creates a shared understanding of how and why a program is expected to work, and it creates a framework to guide program evaluation. As a reminder, the takeaway points for this session are to define the 6 basic parts of a logic model, understand the connections between research methods, program evaluation, and logic models, describe the 5 questions to answer when defining the situation a program is designed to solve, identify 3 things logic models are used for, and define theory of change.
For the last part of our show, I have a special guest here with me in the studio. It's Dr. Keith Friesman, and he's the University Ombuds at California State University, Long Beach. I've invited him to come and talk about the Office of Ombudsman, or ombudsperson, and then I've also invited him to talk about a little bit of the area of program evaluation and how they evaluate their services.
You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Welcome back. For the last part of our show today, I'm going to interview Dr. Keith Friesman. He is the University Ombuds at California State University, Long Beach. And I have him here in the studio for us to learn more about the Office of the Ombuds. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Pamela. Thank you for inviting me for today's program.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. It's our pleasure. We want to learn from you and about this important role that you have.
All right.
So I want to start by asking you about your education and your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the role that you play.
Well, my background, I started off with a bachelor's degree in physical education, and I had a minor in biology, and I ended up getting a teaching credential. But that wasn't my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal was to become a certified athletic trainer and to work in a university college program or maybe in professional. And so my alternative for that was that I needed to go for a master's degree, and I did that, and I got that in the area of physical education. And I ended up coming to Cal State University Long Beach then as a lecturer in athletic training.
Okay.
And that led to a tenure track position there, and that eventually led to me completing my doctorate at USC in the area of higher education and leadership, and then served as a tenured faculty for a period of time at Long Beach, and then eventually became the Ombuds.
Okay. Yeah. And so it sounds like you've been studying people and how they move and react the whole way through.
I have.
Just hearing that story.
But in different types of capacities there. Not totally in the behavioral side of it, but in functionality side, and that's what my discipline is. But I was program director from the day I arrived on campus for athletic training, so that meant I dealt with student behaviors, I dealt with faculty behaviors, and eventually I became quite involved with shared governance on campus. So I chaired a couple of university committees that the nature of themselves were controversial, like general education, its requirements and all the criteria that goes with it. And those committees were about 24 individuals, so we had to work together, and sometimes we were at odds, and then we were at odds with the university. And also then program review. I did each for over 10 years. And in program review, we would have programs who would not submit self-studies and things, and so we had to work with that side of the conflict. So my behaviors in those kind of areas were observed, and I was able to establish some reputation that was very reputable in those areas, and that kind of led to me eventually becoming the Ombuds then.
Now, I don't know if I've ever asked you this. Was the office vacated and then you filled it, or was that when Long Beach ultimately had that office?
When they contacted me to see if I had an interest in the position, it was to be as interim, and they said there was a change occurring in the office.
Sure.
So overall, I am the third Ombuds for Cal State Long Beach. The first one was Elizabeth Novak, followed by Betsy Desick, and then myself.
Okay.
And I became permanent 2 years ago.
Okay. So you became permanent, so that means they liked your work, it sounds like.
Yes, they did. They did a national search, and eventually I was offered the position.
That's nice. So tell us, and the viewing audience ranges from people who understand this area and people who've never heard anything about it.
Okay.
So what does an Ombuds do?
An Ombuds is the shortened form of Ombudsman, and it's of Swedish origin. And the term means someone who looks for or protects for a fair and equitable position or outcome of a particular setting. It usually means they're kind of in the neutral, but it depends on the type of Ombuds you are.
So then that begs me the question, what type of ombuds are you then?
I consider myself an organizational ombuds as
Okay.
opposed to a classical ombuds
Okay.
role. And with an organizational ombuds, it usually means that I serve a defined population,
Okay.
and the purpose of my role in that population is fairness,
Okay.
as opposed to the classical ombuds, which is more involved directly like in civil mediation, the court mediations that take place, or in other forms of mediations, or they may represent a particular population and advocate for that population.
Okay.
So like you may have
Right.
like a hospital ombuds where they're there to advocate for the patient.
Sure.
Or you might be a union ombuds where you advocate for that particular union's outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one thing that I'm hearing is that distinction plays with the neutrality notion, meaning that sometimes you're advocating and then sometimes you maybe are more neutral in that role.
Well, I advocate that I am neutral.
Yeah.
Neutral, impartial.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I function according to the ethical principles of the International Ombuds Association. So but as an organizational ombuds, I look for fairness because I don't advocate directly for my visitor or advocate directly for the university.
Okay.
I make sure both parties are playing fair in the process that is going on. So sometimes I have to say to the patient, we do a reality check with the participant or visitor, or we do a reality check with the university, and we say, okay, what is fair about this? We have to
Okay.
kind of fix things so that it's fair on both parties' part.
So reality check entails asking hard questions? Or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, because many times when a visitor comes in, they do have a particular outcome they would like. And after I get the story and an understanding of everything that they are there to express, I'll ask them the question in the very end, what do you think I can do for you? Or what do you expect the outcome for this to be? And then they'll express that. And I'll say to them, okay, so depending what they have expressed, I may say to them, well, let's do a reality check of what is the reality of you being able to achieve this particular outcome.
Right.
And then we'll have to talk about the hard facts of it.
Okay.
But my role also as an ombuds is to provide alternate choices, options, that they may not have been aware of that may help them move in a different direction
Sure.
or achieve an outcome that they had desired when they came to the office.
So you might bring that unique perspective to the meeting or idea generation
Correct.
or whatever it does to make the situation become fair.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, because sometimes, where I am on campus, we might have old policies that don't reflect the reality of practice now.
Okay.
And it's creating problems within a particular department. So I will move that policy forward and cause an organizational change to take place through the various campus processes
Right.
with that. And so it may have been a visitor that brought that to the forefront, say, hey, we have to readdress this. And the reality is that yes, we do.
So that's
it's
interesting. So
obsolete.
you balance change and fairness,
Yes, I do.
which I think might be hard to do at times.
Well,
Because sometimes people don't like to change, I've learned.
my services that I provide are all voluntary. Everything we discuss is confidential. It's non-binding.
Right.
So they could choose, I don't agree with you. I'm going to
Oh, go to
not
somebody else or, yeah.
use your suggestions, or I'll think about it, or no, you're wrong. I can't do anything about it. And
Okay.
then I'll offer mediation to them.
Sure.
But again, it's an involuntary, it's an informal service that's available to them, and we've been very successful with the visitors that we've worked with. So chances are they will be back to talk
Okay.
about other options after they've gone other places and they can't move forward on anything.
Right.
And sometimes individuals need a little bit of time to think about
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And then once they've thought about it for a few days, some for a few weeks, they'll be back
Yeah.
with, okay, I like what you said. How do we move forward
Okay.
with doing that?
So it might take some time to
Yep,
enact that thinking or
absolutely.
perspective, right?
Correct. But like I said, my suggestions are not binding. Whatever decisions they make is their decisions that they make, but they may not have enough information to help them guide them along the area. So I can give you an example if
Oh,
you'd
sure.
like an example.
Yeah.
So I had a visitor. I call everybody a visitor when they come to my
Yeah.
office because
Okay.
I serve a huge campus community. I serve students, I serve faculty, administrators, alumni, emeriti, and community if they have an issue with that. So I call them all visitors. So I had a visitor come in. The student was in their final semester of graduation and did not pass a particular course they were enrolled, which was required for the major. And they were all upset. They wanted to do a grade appeal and everything
Yeah.
else with it. And a grade appeal wasn't the reality of it based upon this, what the student provided me. So we talked about choices, and the campus has a repeat option available
Right.
to the students, and the student wasn't even aware of that choice existed. So instead of graduating in May, the student moved their date of graduation to August, enrolled in the course during summer, was very successful, and finished then their degree
Right.
in August. So if they hadn't done that outcome, they were going
Yeah.
to grade appeal and push something to fall, but we were able to assist with them to stay on track.
So then your idea generation, right, is combined with, it's like an educational arm on some. I would think some of your job is to educate
It is.
visitors on options they may not know about.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot of different ways too.
Yeah.
It can happen for students, it can happen for faculty, it can happen for administrators, on using my office as a place to reflect. And I've been on campus 40 years, okay.
So you know how a couple of things work.
Yes, and so I understand policy, I understand how the campus works and how these processes can all combine together to be successful for all individuals on all sides of it. So that, to me, that's one of the important parts of my job is that I understand the campus.
Yeah, you seem uniquely qualified in that way, actually.
Yeah.
Because of the population that you described a moment ago, I would think you would call upon lots of your history to have context for the situations that you're
It does,
handling.
and the contacts are important too, because it's important that I have a relationship with other individuals on campus that I can pick up the phone call and make and say to them, hey, I need your help with this. How are we handling these now? Okay, can you take a look at this problem that I'm having? If it's a
Right.
student problem, it'd be enrollment services. And they'll get back to me, here's what the history shows, or here's what the problem is. And then we can discuss that with the student and figure out, okay, here's the solutions to this.
Right, right,
Yeah.
yeah. So when I'm thinking about your office, I'm thinking you have to have a lot of skills to do your job well. What would you say are a couple of the most important skills?
Listening is probably the most important one.
Okay.
And listening carefully. And as you're listening, pay attention not only to the verbal communication, but the nonverbal communication that is going on. Because sometimes why they're there is not why they're talking to you. There's usually an underlying problem that they might cover up with this other issue that
Okay.
they have. And it's to be peaceful, it's to be calm. It doesn't mean the visitor is. The
Yeah, that's you.
ombuds has to be
Yeah.
calm that way, because you
Yeah.
have to de-escalate the situations that are there, and they have to feel comfortable with with that. So listening is incredibly important to that. And as you're listening, you're putting themes together as to what you're understanding they're telling you, and you're acknowledging them and helping them move forward with the issue that they have. But you're also building trust, and you're building empathy for the situation that they found themselves in at that point. And with those skills, then you start to become pretty effective in what you do.
Do people just need to vent? I mean, do you find that to be a key function?
I wouldn't call it a key function, but sometimes people need a place to vent. And
I just was thinking about that when you talked about listening and the empathy, and I thought,
well, sometimes our office is the last stop for individuals on campus. They've been bounced around from one place to another, and eventually they maybe end up in the president's office, and the president's office will say, Keith, will you please listen to this person to see if you can help them? And I will do that. So, but sometimes, like you said, they need a place to vent because they want somebody to hear on campus that this is my problem I had with you guys. I want you to know I had a problem. And they come in many forms.
I believe that.
Many states of language.
And I want to think the faculty are the best behaved, right?
Sometimes.
I can't get
I'll
you to
leave that
commit to
hang
that?
there like that, okay?
Okay.
All right. And but the role is that sometimes they'll come in with a letter they've written, and they'll read the letter to me, and then we'll talk about the letter, and then they'll say, "Okay, I'm happy now. I've had an opportunity to voice my concern that I have, and you've listened to me, so I'm moving on." And I'll say, "Do you want me to do anything about this?" And they'll say, "No, I'm happy. Someone listened to me." Okay. So, I mean, they'll even bring in laptops, and they'll have letters already typed out, or they're so angry when they come in, they have a lot of language we talk about first with that, and then they have pretty demonstrable gestures and things sometimes that go along with it, so we de-escalate the situation so that they can move forward with the problem.
Now, I've seen you in the office, and you don't wear a suit in the office, I've noticed. So today you were nice enough to dress up because we're in the studio, but tell us about dress and your thoughts on not wearing a suit in the office.
I think it kind of depends on the environment you're with. If I was more in a corporate setting all the time, I would probably dress more like this. But I'm in a educational setting, a large university. We're 37,000 students, 4,000 faculty and staff. And I work, as I said previously, with students, faculty, staff, administrators, and the majority of the individuals I see, I need them to feel comfortable with me when they come into the office.
Sure.
Not only is it through my demeanor, but it's through my dress. And if I wore a suit every day, they would view that as managerial, a leader, administrator.
Or you're on the side of the university or the side of the president
so
or whoever, right?
Correct. So I usually dress much more casual, either a Hawaiian print shirt or a casual shirt, so that all individuals that I work with is comfortable.
Yeah, that makes some sense, right? Make them feel comfortable. So when we think about your role as ombuds, tell us what is most thrilling or exciting. Tell us what's the hardest.
The most thrilling part is that is the outcomes from the visits. Not all are achieved that the visitor wants. Many of them are policy oriented. So those are probably the easier ones to figure out, because you lay the policy there, you match up the different components of it. One area of my office that I haven't mentioned is trends and issues of the campus.
Okay.
Sometimes you have all these small pots boiling. It might be in the same division. It might be just all over campus.
Right.
And that's one of my roles as the ombuds, is to have an overall sense of the culture and ethnicity
Right.
on campus, and identify any issues that are kind of out there simmering a little bit.
Okay.
Because I report directly to our campus president.
Right.
And so sometimes my office may be the one that recognizes a particular trend going on
Okay.
that no one else has recognized, or maybe even that a division hasn't recognized. I may have a number of people come from one department to complain about the same issue there, but they've all come independently.
Okay.
So nobody but I will know that we have
Yeah.
this issue coming up in this particular department.
But someone does, at least. We have that, right?
Right, and then I have a role to have a discussion with the appropriate person saying, hey, I have a trends and issues that is coming up. I don't know if you're aware of it. I want to put it on your radar. You know, I can't share with you who or what or why, but you need to be on the radar that you do have an issue that is coming here.
That keeps replaying itself.
Keeps resurfacing.
Yeah, interesting.
You know, and it's starting to have an effect on job performance and morale, and those are two things you don't want to have happen.
Right,
within
and
an
that's on the
organization.
employment side. So
Yeah.
on the student side, you have the same thing, right?
Right, but the student side, we have that choice to them, and it may be something in a department that the chair is not aware of. So I will share that with the chair, because I do believe in a department attempting to solve its own problems within its own department, rather than problems escalating to human resources or escalating to the president's office or the dean's office. Because sometimes I'm asked the question, have you talked to the chair about this? You know?
Yeah.
And there are some issues that can be handled very appropriately there. Other issues require a higher level of discussions
Right.
on resolution.
Sure.
So,
Okay. So sometimes you handle conflicts that are faculty-student. And I would classify that as like an example of a high-power, low-power individual. I'm not saying I want that to be the case. It's just by position, it would seem unequal. How do you equalize it? How do you handle it? What are your comments about that type of interaction?
the way I established my practice usually it will be, well, I'll restate that. What will happen is either a faculty member will approach me and say, I'm having a problem with the student. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to handle it. I don't know how to move forward with it. Or it might be a student that says, I'm having problems with this faculty member. I don't know how to handle it. I don't know how to approach it. Sometimes I may have seen them both independently of each other with that.
Yeah.
But I never like to be caught off guard on anything. So if one comes in and explains something, then I'll ask permission to talk to the other person. And again, it's voluntary. So if they say no, then I can't move forward or anything.
Okay.
We'll talk about other choices with the other person to help to mitigate the situation that they're in, or explain the situation they're in, so that are there any triggers in what is transpiring on your side that is bringing this situation with the say the faculty member, or vice versa with that. So that's how I try to manage those situations. Sometimes we do mediation and we're able to bring the two parties together. You do have that power imbalance that is there, but it's usually an imbalance related maybe to an assignment or not following campus policy or some situation, so it's much easier to balance out.
So you bring in that policy to reflect the conversation on that.
Yeah, so like when a student comes in with a grade appeal intent, the first thing
That's happened?
Yes. More times,
I know. More times,
I've said, and to be honest with you, most of those could be handled very easily by the faculty member in their office, unless they're very adamant. They're very strong-willed, and nobody's going to question, the decision that I've made. But the first thing I'll ask to see is the course syllabus, because that's the contract between the student and the faculty member about the course outcomes and how it's going to be delivered, and whether or not that complies with university policy, and then we can look at things. Sometimes great appeal wishes are not the reality of what you're facing. I mean, you can't say have an 82% in a class and feel that you should have a grade of 90%, which would put you in the A.
Right.
So campus policy helps lay those things out. So we talk about the reality of the probability of it. I never say they can't, because it is their choice if they want to, but the campus has processes and places and levels they can proceed through.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably an interesting set of appeals you get in the grade area, I would think.
It is.
And one that strikes me would be athletes who become ineligible. So would that be something you would deal with, or would it be the athletic area? That are Division I athletes, right?
Correct. I've never had a case or visitor
really?
from that area. That's usually handled within their own environment with that, because they do have a center for athletic advisement, and
so it's
that's there. So it's a regular advising center that they work with. I'm sure they do have athletes that become ineligible on occasion with that, but they will have their own processes in place that handles that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've seen the campus for 40 years from, it sounds like every
Makes
perspective.
me sound old, doesn't it?
It sounds like every perspective, right? So, and now you have the overview of the trends and issues and the conflicts and the politics, and I don't know, we could go on and on. Do you think it's changed over 40 years, like what the conflicts are about? Or are they fundamentally the same?
Depends which arena you're talking about.
Okay.
So if we take the academic side of the house, every discipline is always concerned about their sustainability. They're concerned about ability to offer the courses to the student. Philosophically, we always argue about general education. There's a recent push by the system to change general education.
Yes.
So we're moving into that. Everybody becomes ultra sensitive.
Yeah.
It's a unique management strategy that has to be put in place to fairly and fully discuss what everybody's concerns are with that. So that always presents a challenge to itself with that.
And I'm a lot younger. I've taught 30 years. I'm just kidding. Just had to say that. But I would say general ed, I would agree that has been an issue all along.
Yeah. And really curriculum has evolved over time. 40 years ago it was pretty cut and dried. And then we've added writing intensive courses, we've added interdisciplinary, we've made certain ones required. We've tried to integrate the major into general education, so it has changed along the way, and so the faculty have also changed along the way, but still they have the same type of disciplinary concerns that prior faculty have had.
And then what about students? Do you think student issues are the same?
They're different.
They're different? Okay.
They're different. As my role, I attend our Associated Students Senate in order to stay in tune with the issues that the students are identifying that are important to them. And sometimes they are quite different from campus and quite different from faculty. And they're a bright group of young men and women, very diverse, and they have discussed very effectively different positions on different items that have come forward. And depending on the leadership that they have, they address things differently.
Okay.
Yeah. So some of it may be very controversial,
Mm-hmm.
some of it may not, but is a very passionate direction for them to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that all through resolutions and so forth. So I can get a sense by going to these Senate
Yeah,
meetings and
yeah.
listening to them as to how they feel about different things that are taking place and what position are they going to take on this. And like I said, each Senate is a little different, but they're student focused.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you talked earlier about doing program review, or I think that's what you called it.
correct.
We do in the current class that I'm teaching, we talk about program evaluation somewhat. My question to you is, how do you know when your office is effective? Like, how do you measure it? How do you determine that?
The Ombuds office.
Yeah.
I track.
Okay.
Because we're an informal, the records we maintain are different, but we measure by the standards of the International Ombuds Association
Okay.
based on the cases, and I label every case as either resolved or unresolved or referred,
Okay.
because I do see cases that are inappropriate for our office.
Okay.
Okay, and I have to refer them to other places. I'll kind of answer this in two parts for
Sure.
you, because we're a confidential office,
Yeah.
so the actual component of program evaluation is needed to determine the effectiveness of the office, but a lot of individuals will not participate
Right.
because they don't want to be identified, and we're not asking for any kind of identification. We're just asking for them to go back. So I measure according to the successfulness of the outcome, whether
Okay.
we were to do that. We are looking at putting together either a link they can go to that's anonymous,
Okay.
that they can comment on that. I've seen print ones that I've taken a look at that you can mail out to them, but then again, they're being identified, and that's an issue for them.
And then having it returned
And having
is
it
another
returned,
issue. Yeah.
it is. So some of them call us and say, "Hey, thank you for the great job.
Okay.
I appreciate what you're doing. The university can't be without you." So
Yeah.
we do receive verbal
Right.
feedback on those types of issues, and I receive a lot of informal feedback from the individuals that our office has worked with, or from my supervisor, that you're doing a good job, you're handling things well. So we're pleased with the outcome.
So that's an interesting dilemma, to track
Yeah.
something confidential in order to justify effectiveness.
Yes, it is.
It's like a curious puzzle there.
It is very curious, and that's why we use the categories that the International Ombuds Association has established, so that we can do a comparison of our data
Sure.
to their standards with that, and then that's consistent then
Yeah.
with other programs we begin to take a look at.
Yeah, and that's something I think about program evaluation. If you can get systematic practices in place, you have a better shot at making comparisons and structuring the responses in a way that they become meaningful, as opposed to just saying we have kind of like this and that feedback. But that sounds like very systematic, even if it isn't perfect. It at least gives you
Yeah,
the
it's not
structure,
perfect,
right?
and we're trying to move to the next level, because
Yeah.
I've done some comparison to other CSUs that have ombuds.
Okay.
And some of them use a print form, or they give
Okay.
them a form when they leave. Others say, "Here's a link on our website. Will you go and do this?" So we're still playing around a little bit with what is going to be the best way for us to maintain the confidentiality that's expected of us, but yet still receive good feedback
Right.
from our visitors.
I find the dilemma, I think we share the same dilemma when I'm doing court mediations. I have people that don't get what they want. I mean, we try, but they
Right.
don't get necessarily what they came in for. And then we hand them a "how satisfied are you" survey, and then they maybe give me a little bit of my services as well as how mad they are about the outcome, which isn't what I'm asking them about. I'm
Right.
asking them about my services as a
Correct.
mediator, and I would think you would share that same issue potentially.
We do, but I find that dilemma in other places too. To use a medical model for you, you have patients who are happy with medical services they receive, okay,
Yeah.
and chances of them, you giving them a form and they filling it out and saying they're happy, they don't do that.
Yeah.
Those who have a complaint or are unhappy about the services they
Right.
feel, chances are they're going to fill it out and turn it in. So you get an imbalance that
Yeah.
comes between it. So finding the appropriate methodology that's going to measure that is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a very interesting dilemma.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, I would wonder if there would be known percentages of how much, you're going to get 20% more complaints because of not getting the outcome you wanted or something like that. I would think there would be those numbers somewhere out there. I don't know if we'd ever find them, but
Yeah, I'd have to look for them.
Yeah.
If there is anything out there that talks about, that evaluative component in those terms. Yeah.
now, do you publish a report, like a program evaluation report each year that you give to the president or someone?
I share that with the president, the results that are out there.
Sure.
We are moving to a different data collection system at this point to make it easier to generate those reports and things and start to make them more campus available.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just was curious because I think it would be also tricky there too, because here's this, but you can't know about it, but you can know that it happened, or.
But that's why we
I mean-
use the International Ombuds
Yeah.
Association's categories, so it's consistent with them, and
Right.
it actually has a very detailed breakdown as what we can find in that particular.
So that's helpful,
category.
yeah. So that organization is known for being sort of the organization,
That's
is
correct.
what I've learned. Is that where did you do training with them?
I did. Well, my training for this position has been a lot of my experiences being program director and department chair and chairing those different committees, but I also completed mediation and training through the Los Angeles Bar Association, and I also took instruction through the International Ombuds Association to make sure that I was within the same standards
Sure.
of practice there.
Because they have like a ombuds level 1 and 2 and these
Correct.
different things. Would you recommend that to someone who's interested in this career?
I would.
Yeah.
I actually would, because I'm seeing more job descriptions come out where that they're expecting at least Foundations 101 from the International Ombuds Association,
Right.
and then they offer some additional role playing and courses above that with that, because that at least gives you some standardization on how they feel ombuds should approach mediation or should approach their particular practice. Yeah, I found the LA one very interesting on the mediation because I was in a class with all attorneys.
Oh, right.
So that
The Bar Association.
the Bar
Yeah.
Association, and that was a week long of instruction, 8 hours a day, and a lot of them were retired attorneys looking to do mediation
Sure.
as a service they could provide post-retirement. So that was always very interesting because they thought about things differently. They thought
Yeah.
more as a mediator and ombud, you think a little bit differently about
Right.
it. And they're always thinking about the details of the law, which section
Yeah.
of the law,
Oh,
and all
yeah.
those kind of things. And,
Absolutely.
And that doesn't necessarily make them the best mediator because you can't
I-
practice law in
I
this
agree.
role.
I agree. I think it's hard if you come from a competitive bargaining, point of view, like where you're always trying to win, to all of a sudden say, okay, we have to figure out how we'll win.
Yes,
That's got to be an interesting shift. I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's pretty challenging.
it is. I mean, our course instructor would remind them, okay, you can't do that. You're thinking from the law side of the house. You
Yeah.
can't think from that side of the house. So
So
that
you
was
were
a
like the
challenge.
lone balanced person in the room, right?
I was. I was. It was like, okay, this is, well, I felt intimidated with
Yeah,
all
yeah.
these people in there, and and then some of them still thought they were in court the way they wanted
Yeah.
to participate in the process.
Yeah.
But I have, and really what makes you become more comfortable in a role like this is practice, practice, and practice. Working with patients.
Sure.
Or excuse me, patients. That's
Or-
my other life. with visitors.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is something. When I first started my career, I would have never thought that this is what I would be doing
Yeah.
at this point of my career. But it has provided me with a different challenge. I feel that I'm good at what I do with that. But if I didn't have some additional characteristics that went along with this, I don't know if I would find it successful or not. Because you have to have trust. So I have that.
Yeah,
I've
you have-
built that. I've built my integrity.
Right. So you
People
had
know me.
Reputation, sure.
Yeah, and so that has made my transition in this role very effective. To be able to work with campus counterparts in resolving different kinds of issues that come up and being able to resolve them quickly. But recognize where the limit of my skills are at, that where it has to be transitioned to a different part of the campus to effectively deal with what the real issue is behind the
You're like the
scenes.
officer of reality. You're like, wait, let's have reality enter this picture, right?
Well, I deal with reality every day.
Yeah, very much so. And that's when you were talking about the attorneys, I was thinking in my mind, are they representing what should happen by the books, and you're representing what is happening?
There's a difference.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting theoretically to think about that, how we approach it.
It is. It's a total different approach.
But I think reality is, that's where we are. It's what's happening now.
Yeah. So like when I see
Yeah.
visitors, they're concerned about the present. Something has happened to them
right.
now in the present. How am I going to manage this? What kind of long-term effect is it going to have on me? And then we talk about, well, how did you end up getting caught up in this stuff like
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
And, so those changes we talk about, but everybody's interested, okay, how do I recover from this? Or what do I do to change this perspective right now? How am I going to move forward with this? I like where I'm at. I don't want to consider some other alternatives to this. So how am I going to move forward and still feel comfortable with what I'm doing?
Yeah. So for a new ombuds, let's say someone was becoming a new ombuds, we talked a little bit about training. What would you predict would be the hardest thing for a new ombuds to learn?
Your clientele. Because it depends on the type of ombud you are.
Sure.
And whether they trust you enough.
Which has to be built, can't
Has
just be
to be
named.
built.
Yeah.
So there has to be a few that have come out to visit you, and they're happy with the outcome, and they go back at their environment, and they say, hey, the ombud's a good person, you can go talk to them.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things I did when I came into this role is I did a lot of outreach across where I was, so that everybody would know I'm in this role now. This is what I do. I have these services available to you. And my visitors coordinator and I went out. So we met with deans, we met with department chairs, we met with vice presidents to make sure key players across the way could be aware that we provided these services.
Right.
Because sometimes issues reach a level where they can't be managed there, but they could be referred to my office.
Which they
and
would probably
managed,
hear as good news.
which I would hope they would hear.
No,
as
but
good
I'm
news,
thinking
yeah.
if you have a problem
Yeah.
that's hard to solve, and you have all these other things you're trying to do, I would think it would be wonderful to hear about someone who's going to specialize in helping.
It would be, because
I mean-
then you're making sure whoever the person is getting the right kind of help that goes along with it.
Yeah.
So, because sometimes when students or any other individuals come about, I have mentioned previously that sometimes they contact an office and they get referred to another office, to another
right.
office. We're the last stop. We're going to make sure
Yeah.
you get the right place, or we're going to help you get through this. And again, we're going to be realistic about what the need is at that particular point in time. And we get a lot of diverse calls about different things. From,
Especially being so large. There's so much out there.
and parents are concerned too.
That's an
about
interesting
student-
one. What do you do with them? Because you're dealing with adults, right? So,
We're dealing with adults, so we have to keep in mind about FERPA.
yeah,
And you remind the parents of that very carefully.
yeah,
And we remind them, well, if you're concerned about this, you can send your child to see us, and we'll talk to them about it. With that, sometimes they just call with general questions. You guys have a fashion and merchandising program or not?
Oh, really?
Yes, yes, we do, and this is who you see in family and consumer sciences. Or does the university provide medical insurance for your student?
You're like the other information switchboard.
Yeah, well, sometimes they get sent to us because nobody can answer the question elsewhere. So that's
kinda
okay.
That's kind of interesting.
Both my visitors coordinator and I have been here a little while, so
Yeah.
we're quite familiar with the campus and where
Right.
things can be found and who contacts have to be.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I think as a faculty member, I would say parents contact me every 5 years, once maybe, to which I say, thank you so much, but no, we can't have, we're not in a relationship.
Right.
I am formally with your child, who's an adult, and
Yeah, and they don't understand the FERPA
right,
that goes along with it, and so we explain that, and your child has avoided telling you.
yeah. And there's all these things that you don't know, which we can't tell you, but
Right.
yeah, that's interesting.
But it's been a very interesting and fulfilling experience for me so far. I'm glad I made the decision to move to this role.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting change, given the progression you talked about. Now you're sort of the peacekeeper,
Yes.
or you are.
Try to be the peacekeeper.
Try to be, yeah.
Like I said, some people don't want to participate, and so their situation kind of moves on in a negative manner rather
Right.
than trying to refocus things positively.
Yeah. So one last question for you.
Sure.
Tips you would give someone who wants to become an ombuds? Just any ways to think, steps to take?
Well, it's a very interesting field. There are now certificate programs they can complete. There are majors in conflict resolution. There's post baccalaureate degree programs, which you can pursue a master's or a PhD in conflict resolution. I would just say, keep in mind, every day is a day of conflict. So if you're looking
good
for
comment.
something peaceful, okay, you may not get that.
Right.
Because you're working in an environment where somebody has a concern, usually a negative concern. They have an issue that's usually negative. They're there to complain. They're there to whine about something. And depending on the number of visitors you see per day, they can be overwhelming.
Sure.
And what kind of impact will that have on your personality and on the way you feel that particular day? So this is something you're going to do every day, every day. Can you refresh each day and come back with it?
Yeah.
And it helps knowing the work environment that you're in.
Sure.
So getting some training helps give you the confidence with
Right.
that. and if you can get some experience in with that, that works. That's why you have the, I did the civic mediation stuff, because that gave me a different perspective.
Right.
But I'm working within an organization, so it depends what your environment is that you're working. Because you said you do court.
Right.
You do the civil type of work, so it does make a difference.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah.
Do I take things home with me? Yes.
Okay.
But not from a negative perspective.
Okay.
It may be from an environment that I'm working through, a visitor's complaint that I've had, and I'm thinking about it, and it's percolating back there for subconsciously, and then the solution just may come to you
Right.
at that point in time.
Yeah.
So it's the more difficult ones are like that.
I hear a degree of patience through this interview that has to be exercised, it seems like.
You have to be patient.
Yeah, whether it's
have
for the solution or for the person to tell their story or...
Well, that's what they always say about
Yeah.
me, is that I'm patient.
Yeah.
And I'm calm.
Yeah.
That's a word they use to describe me.
Right.
And I think you have to be. You
Sure.
can't be high-strung. You're there to de-escalate the situation. You're there to bring confidence back to them. You're there to help them move forward. And they need a feeling of stability that is there. If you take some of the conflict resolution courses, you're gonna learn that you reframe comments back more positively. You try to avoid any of the negativeness that they're stating, so you restate it. You try to get the whole story. Make sure you're addressing the underlying cause with it. And that helps you formulate your ideas on what options do you have there. But I always get both sides of the story.
Yeah.
Because
Very important.
Well, I'm not advocating for one
Right.
side or the other, and sometimes I've heard one side, and then the other individual comes in, or individuals come in, and I hear a different side. And sometimes they may be totally opposite. And then with additional interviews, then we start to sort the pieces
Yeah.
that need to be addressed. I had one visitor who was extremely angry with the university, but it turned out the underlying cause of their anger was not related to the university. It was related to a personal issue.
Right.
And so it was more important to start addressing the personal issue, which then solved the issue that was escalating
Right.
at the university level. So sometimes when we do the reality check,
Yeah.
they go, oh, yeah.
Reality check, detective, patient, peacemaker,
Absolutely.
many hats. Thank you so much for being here for the interview. We really appreciate
Well,
you coming out.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate
My
being
pleasure.
here very much.
Yep. So I think we've learned a lot, and have a great day.
Okay, you too.
Thank you.
And we'll see you around.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Well, thank you for joining us today, and I hope that the rest of your day is not just different, but significantly different.